piquing your reader's curiosity and urging them to find out what happens next. Where does it belong? The hook must show up in your first chapter, preferably on the first page, and even more preferably in the first line. 2. The inciting event. What is it? The inciting event is the turning point in the first act when your character first brushes the story's main conflict. To identify your inciting event, ask yourself, what event starts the ball rolling in my story's plot? Where does the conflict begin? What sets the story's action in motion? Where does it belong? The inciting event is the turning point halfway through the first act, one of the secret pieces of story structure. This timing allows for the story's normal world to be properly established. Don't confuse the inciting event with the hook. The hook will be the first in the line of causal dominoes, bumping one scene into the other, but your protagonist won't come into direct contact with the main conflict until the inciting event later in the first act. 3. The key event. What is it? If the inciting event is where your protagonist first encounters the main conflict, the key event is what irrevocably engages your protagonist with that conflict. Even if you have a great big inciting event, like say the beginning of a war, it can't affect your character until the key event drags him into the mess, as would happen if he were drafted into the army. Where does it belong? The key event occurs toward the end of the first act. Often it will be so closely linked to the following first plot point as to be almost inextricable. Other times, the key event and the first plot point will be two distinct moments. More on the key event in Chapter 3. 4. The first plot point. What is it? The first plot point marks the end of the first act and the beginning of the second. This is where everything changes for your character. Up to now, the first act has mostly concerned itself with setting up your character's normal world and introducing the supporting characters, the settings, and most importantly, the stakes. But now, the first plot point rocks that normal world. Everything changes, and your protagonist will be forced to start reacting to the new status quo. Where does it belong? The first plot point will occur around about the 25% mark in your book. This placement doesn't have to be absolutely precise, since a book is long enough to allow a less than exact structural timeline. But aim to have your major plot points dividing your book into rough quarters. The second act. 5. The first half of the second act. What is it? Your protagonist is going to spend the first half of the second act in reaction mode. More on that in Chapter 5. The first plot point changed his world, and probably not for the better. For the next quarter of the book, right up until the midpoint, he's going to be fighting to keep his head above water. Where does it belong? The first half of the second act will span approximately from the first plot point at the 25% mark to the midpoint at the 50% mark. 6. The midpoint. What is it? The midpoint is your story's second major plot point. This is where everything changes again. Just as your character's world was rocked off its axis by the first plot point, now it gets shaken up all over again as he is struck with an all-important moment of truth, coming in Chapter 5. Before the midpoint, he was thrown into reaction mode. Now he's equipped to start taking action. Where does it belong? The midpoint belongs smack in the middle of your story, where it will also divide the second act in half. 7. The second half of the second act. What is it? After the midpoint, your character is going to start going on the offensive. He's no longer going to be willing to simply have the antagonist bring the battle to him. Instead, he starts throwing off his insecurities and implementing his own plans. Where does it belong? The second half of the second act begins at the midpoint and will continue all the way to the beginning of the third act at the 75% mark in your story. The third act. 8. The third plot point. What is it? The third plot point, as your final major plot point, is going to change everything once again. Whatever happens here is going to force your character to a low place. He's going to finally have to analyze his actions and his motivations and get down to the core of his own personal character arc. This is where he'll start to identify